Well, today we're starting a new series called the Psalms Playlist, and there's our old cassette tape. Jess talked about making a mixtape. I remember the days of the mixtape. I remember them well. I had one of those double cassette boom boxes. You remember those? I lost about half of you. All you young folks consider this a tutorial. All right, we had two cassette decks right next to each other, right? And you'd put one of those tapes in one, and it would be like I don't know, Journey or something like that you really loved back in the day, or Van Halen or Def Leppard or something like that. You put it in there, and then you put a blank cassette in the other tape deck, and you'd play the one and record the other. And you'd have to wait for the whole song to end, and you have to pause it at just the right moment, and then you put another tape in, and you have to repeat the process. There was none of this, let me search up on iTunes the exact song that I want, and let me just hit a little plus button, and now I've created a playlist. No. This was a tedious, painstaking process. You had to really love the song to make it happen. But by the time it was all said and done, man, you had your mixtape, and it was awesome until the tape deck ate your tape, and then you'd have to go through all the work again, right? Those were the days. Well, the reason I called this Psalms Playlist is because Psalms is essentially a collection of poems and songs. And you can tell, if you really know what to look for, you can tell it's a lot of songs in there. And today we're going to look at one that is a song. And throughout the summer, the entire summer, we're going to fill up the whole summer with a Psalms playlist. We're going to pick different Psalms, and we're going to go through them, and we're going to learn a lot, because the Psalms are some of the most beautiful, poetic, meaningful passages in the whole Bible. So I hope you look forward to it. Today, we're looking at one of my favorites from Psalm 42. Most people know Psalm 42 because of the first verse. And you know it like this. If you were raised in church like me, you know it like this. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee, O God. Right? Doesn't that sound so eloquent and beautiful? And we even developed, back in the day, a campfire song about this psalm. Do y'all remember it? As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. Now you see why I don't lead worship anymore? No. But that's what we used to sing, and it was, oh man, it was so good. And it sounds so serene, doesn't it? It's just such a beautiful picture. I want to unpack it for you in a way that you might not have thought of before. So let's look at it. We're looking at it in a slightly different version than I just shared with you. This is what it says. Just like a deer that craves streams of water, my whole being craves you, God. My whole being thirsts for God, for the living God. When will I come and see God's face? My tears have been my food both day and night, as people constantly question me, where's your God now? But I remember these things as I bear my soul, how I made my way to the mighty one's abode, to God's own house, with joyous shouts and thanksgiving songs, a huge crowd celebrating the festival. Why, I ask myself, are you so depressed? Why are you so upset inside? Hope in God, because I will again give him thanks, my saving presence and my God. My whole being is depressed. That's why I remember you from the land of Jordan, and Hermon from Mount Mizar. Deep called to deep, and at the noise of your waterfalls, all your massive waves surged over me. By day the Lord commands his faithful love. By night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life. I will say to God, my solid rock, why have you forgotten me? Why do I have to walk around sad, oppressed by my enemies? With my bones crushed, my foes make fun of me, constantly questioning me, where's your God now? Why, I ask myself, are you so depressed? Why are you so upset inside? Hope in God, because I will again give him thanks, my saving presence and my God. Now, the first thing we see in this passage is we see a craving for God. And back in the day when I used to read this in the most serene way. I used to read it, and in my head, it was like something that would be crocheted and hung on your grandma's wall with a little deer crocheted on there. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. Or something that would be on one of those signs at Hobby Lobby that you ladies love, right? One of those signs, and it would just have this deer just sort of gently and beautifully craning his neck down to a stream of water, and it would have this wonderful little statement on it, and we would hang it up over our couch, and we would think, oh, what a lovely verse, right? I totally got the tone of this wrong. Because you read the entire passage, and what you realize is he's writing about a dehydrated deer that's on its last leg. And that won't sell at Hobby Lobby. Like, help, I'm dehydrated. Oh, my antler fell off. I'm dying. You know, nobody wants to put that over their couch. But that's what he's saying. I'm a dehydrated deer. Have you ever been dehydrated? I have. It's terrifying. It's one of the worst things that can ever happen to you. Your body literally stops working. You cramp up. Your body stops working. Sometimes you hallucinate. Nothing works the way it's supposed to. And you can't fix it right away. You can't just say, oh, man, I'm dehydrated. I'm cramping up. Let me drink a bottle of water. That won't do it. You got to get IV fluids. It's a serious health crisis. You can die from it. A lot of people do. In Texas, every year, people end up getting dehydrated, having heat stroke, and dying. And that's what this deer is going through. This deer is craving for water. He's panting for water. He is on his last leg. And we know that because if you read through this whole thing, you hear things like this. My tears have been my food both day and night, as people constantly question me, where's your God? We read things like this. Why, I ask myself, are you so depressed? Why are you so upset inside? You hear things like this. My whole being is depressed. And you hear things like this. Why have you abandoned me, God? So here's a guy who is limping along, just trying to survive what he's going through. We know a little bit about David's life. We know that for big portions of his life, he was being tracked and hunted. We know that his children were just, his family situation was a complete disaster. One of his sons was actually trying to kill him at one point. Another one of his sons raped his daughter, his own sister, you know. So this is a guy who went through a lot of pain and often was alone and many times had to face being hunted by people he trusted and loved. And so what he's expressing here is, I am desperate, I am struggling, I'm on my last leg, and I am craving for God because he's the only one who can help me. And so my question for you is, have you ever been there? Have you ever been there where you are craving for God, where your soul is dehydrated, where you are like a deer who just you got to get a drink of water? It's the only thing that's going to help you survive. I've been in those moments. I went through a season earlier this year when I didn't know if I was going to make it through, you know. Just mentally, just difficult. And really for the first time in my life, it was a season of depression. I dealt with anxiety before, but depression is a whole new ball game, right? And I didn't know what to do. So I just stopped down one day and said, God, I'm desperate. I need you. You're the only one who can help me. You're the only one who can fix this for me. I'm craving you right now because nothing else can help me survive. It's got to be you. And I just want to let that image sink in a little bit, because some of you are there. You're going through it, and you're hanging on by a thread, and you're craving something more. You're craving exactly what David craved here. You're craving a touch from the Lord. And the reason David craved this so much is because he knew it. He knew the touch of the Lord. He had experienced it before. Remember, this is a man after God's own heart. This is a man who deeply knew and loved the Lord. But in his present circumstance, it's kind of mocking his past faith, right? And maybe you're there too. So we see a craving for God. Secondly, we see a desire for God's presence and people. We see a desire for God's presence and people. He says, I'm so desperate, and then I remember when I was in God's house with God's people. He's talking about going to a festival, and he says, I was in the Lord's house. I was in God's house, and I was celebrating with God's people, and we were celebrating the festivals. And if you know anything about Jewish history, they observed a lot of festivals, and at all of those festivals, they would sing praises to the Lord. They would worship Him, and it was really a celebration of the faithfulness of God. And it was a communal thing where all the people came together and they ate and they praised, and it was a several-day thing. And so this is what David is remembering, and it's what he's longing for. He's longing to be in the presence of God with his people. He's longing for church because he knows that something happens when God's people get together. And when we sing those praises to Him, and when we hear the Word of God open up before us, and when we get a chance to shake each other's hands and hug each other and have some deep conversations about how we're doing together, when we get those opportunities, there is something beautiful about that uplifts and encourages our soul. And that's what David is remembering. He's saying, I'm alone, I'm afraid, I'm desperate, and what I wouldn't do to be back with God's people, praising Him together and communing with the people I love. Now, our tendency sometimes when we get depressed, when we get down, when we feel desperate, our tendency is to back away from that kind of gathering. Our tendency is to say, I don't want to go be around people, and I don't want to go and sing these songs, and I don't want to go and, shake somebody's hand or give somebody a hug because I don't want to bring my mess in there. I don't want to be needy in front of people. I don't want to bring my junk. And I would say to you, if you are needy and messy and got some junk, you could not be in a better place. This is exactly where you should be. And the big lie about church that we have all been led to believe over the years is that it's a place where you can't bring your junk, where you got to come put together. I don't know how we ever bought into that lie, but it's a lie. This should be a place where we come and it's okay if you're not together, because I can help carry you through that. We can help each other get through that. We can be real with each other. That's what it ought to be. And I think that's what David is longing for here. He's craving for God, but he's also craving for God's people, because he knows that that's one of the things that can pull you out of despair. I want you to hear that. Laying in bed and isolating and getting away from everybody is not going to bring you out of it. The only thing that has the best hope of bringing you out of it is craving the Lord and craving His people. And when those two things come together, there's some beautiful things that happen. So don't ever feel ashamed about coming here. Come. It'll help. I told you this before. We started off the year talking about this. We are real people with real problems who serve a real God who really loves us. That's what this is about. Third thing that we see here, we see a craving for God, a desire for God's presence and people. And I really want you to see this when we see an undying hope. I really love this passage because, and it's a weird reason to love it, probably. But I love it that he mentions in here several times that he's depressed. Why are you so depressed? Why are you so upset inside? My whole being is depressed. On and on, he says, verse 11, why, I ask myself, are you so depressed? Why are you so upset inside? He says that several times, and I find it strangely comforting to hear a hero of the faith, a man after God's own heart, the greatest king in Israel's history, admit that he's depressed. It's just strangely comforting to me. Because I feel like we kind of live in a Christian world where, you can't ever say something like that or you lack faith or something like, if you're depressed, you just don't have enough faith. I think David had a lot of faith. I think he trusted deeply in the Lord. And he still dealt with this. He still dealt with the struggle. You know why he dealt with that struggle? Because sometimes this sin-tarnished world that we live in on this side of eternity is downright depressing. Sometimes it is. You don't make it not depressing by going, by having some pie in the sky, unrealistic, idea and basically lying about the state of the world that we live in and how it sometimes affects you. David doesn't do that. He's alone. He's probably running for his life. He's probably hiding in caves, and he's saying, this is depressing. If you were alone, hiding in a cave, and quite possibly one of your sons was trying to kill you, do you think you'd be like, oh no, everything's good, I'm good. Everything's good, we're doing fine. It's all sunshine around. Hey, I'm good. My kid just tried to kill me, but I'm good. If you said that, I'd be worried about your sanity. David's just being honest here. He's being real. He's telling the truth. But here's the good news, and here's why I say he has an undying hope. Remember I told you he repeats over and over again? So he repeats this deal about being depressed. He repeats this deal about being unsettled inside. But guess what he always ends with? He always ends with hope. He doesn't, if we're talking about a record here, the record scratch doesn't keep repeating the depression. The record scratch keeps repeating the hope. He ends with the hope. He always ends with hope in God because I will again give him thanks, my saving presence and my God. Here's the deal. You can be realistic about the depressing state of the world. You can be realistic about the depressing state of your own mind. You can be realistic and honest about the struggles that you have. I hope you are. But always end on hope. Don't just end with the negative. Always end with hope. And that's what David does. He ends with hope here. I often tell my kids, because kids, teenagers in particular, they can get in these cycles of negativity, right? I'm sorry, teenagers, I love you. I'm glad you're here. Adults do it too. But teens have a tendency to, oh, so-and-so looked at me bad today. I'm so ugly and everything's bad and it's awful and I'm, so-and-so didn't like my post and, they think I'm an idiot and I can't stand them. And that, whatever happens in that moment becomes their reality forever. We all have a tendency to do it. It's very myopic. We see this one little thing that happens to us, and because it happens to us, it has a tendency to define forever. And I always tell my kids, hey, hold on. This isn't forever. This is just one thing that happened today. And you're probably not going to remember it in 2 weeks. And you're definitely not going to remember it in a year. And you certainly won't remember it in 10 years. It's just today. So let that roll off you. I tell my kids, it's like if you took a Polaroid camera to the Grand Canyon. You couldn't fit the whole Grand Canyon in one picture. You'd have to take hundreds, maybe thousands of pictures, thousands of different pictures from different vantage points. And if you taped all of those pictures together, you'd have the whole Grand Canyon. Just imagine that. One snapshot at a time, the entire Grand Canyon. But if you took one of those pictures off and looked at it, guess what it would look like? Dirt and rocks and nothingness. So we have to be careful as God's people that we don't take one picture off and let it define our whole life. Instead, we always step back and scan with a mindset of hope. And we say, hey, you know what? It's rocky and gross and empty right now, but I see the whole picture, Lord, and it's beautiful, it's magnificent, it's marvelous. And so we say, like David, I'm depressed, I'm struggling, I long to be with God like a dehydrated animal. I long to be with his people. I need that in my life. But for now, I'm desperate, I'm hopeless, the waves are crashing over me, people are questioning my faith. I'm struggling. But I'm not going to end there. I'm going to end here, hope in God, because I will again give him thanks, my saving presence and my God. What we find out from this psalm is when you're struggling, there's a desperate craving for God. There's a desire for God's presence in his people, and you have to cling to an undying hope. So what do we do with this? How do we apply these things to our lives? The first thing I would tell you is be honest. Be honest with God. One of the things you're going to find as we go throughout this summer and look at all these different psalms is you're going to find that they are so honest with God. If he's struggling, he's going to say it. If he's victorious, he's going to say it. If he's depressed, he's going to say it. If he's anxious, he's going to say it. If he's hungry, he's going to say it. If he's thirsty, he's going to say it. Whatever happens to him, he says it, and he says it to God. And again, this is one of those lies that I think we have bought into, that somehow we can't say what we need to say to God, that we can't be honest with God. Well, newsflash, he already knows. He already knows what you're thinking. He already knows what you're going through. He already knows what you did last night. He knows what you did last summer. Okay? He knows. So just tell him. Just be honest with God. That's one of the things that we learn from Psalms. Be honest with God. Secondly, preach the gospel to yourself. Preach the gospel to yourself. You see this with David. Remember, I told you he repeats things over and over again. That's what songs do. They have choruses. The choruses repeat over and over again. And so one of the themes in Psalms is that David reminds himself of the truth. He's honest about the hard stuff, but over and over again he reminds himself of the truth. My hope is in you, God. You are my hope and salvation. You are my refuge. You are my strength. And what he's essentially doing, this is before Christ came, but he's essentially preaching the gospel to himself. And we have to be people who do that too. We can go through the hard stuff and be honest about it, but we always have to preach the gospel to ourselves. I'm a child of God. Jesus died for me. He loved me enough to die for me. He rose again. He lives today. He has given me power and victory. Abide in him. Trust in him. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. And so over and over again, you need to become an expert at preaching the gospel to yourself. You know, one thing that I do before I preach to you, I preach to me, right? I get here early and I preach to me. And the entire week when I'm putting this together, I'm asking the Lord, give me something to share this week. And every single time, I feel like I can preach to you because I've already preached to me. I can't be your preacher all week. You got to be. And you got to remind yourself of the truth all week. You need to be so mindful of the truth and so preaching the truth to yourself that people need to see you at a stoplight and think you're crazy because you're talking to yourself. I'm not talking to myself. I'm preaching to myself. I'm serious. Out loud. Preach to yourself. Talk to yourself. Tell yourself the truth. Remind yourself the truth of God's word. It's really going to help you. People might think you're crazy. That's okay. Preach the gospel to yourself. Thirdly, listen to God. Listen to God. David wrote a lot of these psalms while he was alone. And he listened to the Lord. And we see it. One of my favorite lines in this psalm is where he says, deep calls to deep. I love that line, man. If you're a poet or a songwriter, you dream of writing a line like that. Deep calls to deep. Man, that is just a cool line. And what it reminds me of is those moments in my life where the Holy Spirit communicates with my spirit. And it's deep. It's the depth of God communicating with the depth of my soul. And it's deep. And I can't ever say that for me that it's something with words. People are really fond, and I think sometimes maybe too careless with saying that, oh, God told me this, and God told me that. And I think what I have experienced is that God has impressed upon me certain things at certain times in my life, and really oftentimes impresses things into the depth of my spirit. And it's not even words as much as it is an impression. And then the only way I know how to take that is to translate that into words and go and do those things. So there are times whenever I feel impressed that I need to go and talk to someone. Or I feel impressed that I need to go and do this certain thing. And I know that it's the depth of the Lord calling to the depth in me. It's deep calling to deep. And that happens typically when my spirit is still and I'm listening to God. And so I would encourage you to listen to the Lord. Get away from the hustle, get away from the busyness and the distractions, and sit and listen to the Lord. The other night I couldn't sleep. I was up tossing and turning until about 3 a.m. And so I got up, finally just couldn't lay there anymore. I got up and I went into my quiet place where nobody else goes, and that's my garage. And so I went and sat out in the garage at 3 a.m. and just stared at the wall. And after about 10 minutes of just kind of sitting there looking, I said, God, thank you for being here with me. Thank you for sitting with me and always being with me. And in that moment, I felt a deep calm. And I went back inside and fell asleep. And sometimes it's just that way. You know when the depth of the Lord is communicating with the depth of your spirit. And so I would say, listen to God. Be honest with God. Preach the gospel to yourself and listen to the Lord. I think those are things that we learn from Psalms. Those are things that we see over and over again. Those are some themes that you're going to see many times as we go throughout this series. Can't wait to go through it with you. Here's what I want you to do now. Just bow your heads, close your eyes, and I want you to consider a few things. Number one, just in the quiet of this moment, tell God your honest thoughts right now. Whatever is in your mind at this moment, tell Him about it. Secondly, just right now, in this moment, remind yourself of the truth. Preach the gospel to yourself. God loves me. Jesus died for me. Jesus rose again, and I am not alone. I have hope because of Jesus. I have life because of Jesus. I have a purpose because of Jesus. Keep it going. Just preach the gospel to yourself right now. And now just listen. Just listen to God's Spirit. Let His deep talk to your deep.